Imagine human beings living in an underground, cave-like dwelling, with an entrance a long way up, which is both open to the light and as wide as the cave itself. They've been there since childhood, fixed in the same place, with their hands and legs chained, able to see only in front of them, because their bonds prevent them from turning their heads around. Light is provided by a fire burning far above and behind them, also behind them, but on a higher ground, there is a path stretching between them and the fire. Imagine that along this path, a low wall has been built, like the screen in front of the puppeteers, above which they show their puppets. Also imagine that there are people along the wall, carrying all kinds of artifacts that project above, statues of people and other animals, made of stone, wood, every material, and as you'd expect, some of the carriers are talking, and some are silent. Suppose, first of all, that these prisoners see anything of themselves and one another besides the shadow that the fire casts on the wall in front of them. And what if their prisoners also had an echo from the wall facing them? Don't you think they'd believe that the shadow passing in front of them were talking whenever one of the carriers passing along the wall was doing so? Then the prisoners would in every way believe that the truth is nothing other than the shadow of those artifacts. Consider then what being released from their bonds and cured of their ignorance would naturally be like. When one of them was freed and suddenly compelled to stand up, turn his head, walk, and look up towards the light, he'd be pained and dazzled and unable to see the things whose shadows he'd seen before. What do you think he'd say if we told him that what he'd seen before was inconsequential, but that now, because he is a bit closer to the things that are, and is turned towards things that are more, he sees more correctly? If someone compelled him to look at the light itself, his sight would hurt. If someone dragged him away from there by force, up the rough, steep path, and didn't let him go until he dragged himself into the sunlight, he would be pained and irritated at being treated that way. Into the light, with the sun filling his eyes, he would be unable to see a single one of the things now said to be true. He'd need time to be adjusted before he could see things in the world above. At first, he'd see shadows most easily than images of men and other things, than the things themselves. Of these, he'd be able to study the things in the sky itself more easily at night looking at the light of the stars and the moon, than during the day looking at the sun. Finally, he'd be able to see the sun, not images of it in the water, or in some alien place, but the sun itself in its own place, and be able to study it. At this point, he would interfere and conclude that the sun provides the seasons and the years, governs everything in the visible world, and is in some way the cause of all things that he used to see. When he reminds himself of his first dwelling place, his fellow prisoners, and what passed for wisdom there, he'd count himself happy for the change, and pity the others. And if there had been any honors, praises, or prizes among them for the one who was sharpest at identifying the shadows as they passed by, and who best remembered which usually came earlier, which later, and who could thus best divine the future, our men would not desire these rewards, or envy those among the prisoners who were honored and held power. Instead, wouldn't he feel with Homer that he'd much prefer to work the earth as a serf to another, one without possessions, and go through any suffering, rather than share their opinions and live as they do? Consider this too. If this man went down into the cave again and sat down in the same seat, wouldn't his eyes coming suddenly out of the sun like that will be filled with darkness? Before his eyes had recovered, and the adjustment wouldn't be quick, while his vision was still dim, if he had to compete again with the perpetual prisoners in recognizing the shadows, wouldn't he invite ridicule? Wouldn't it be said of him that he'd return from his upward journey with his eyesight ruined, and that it isn't worthwhile to even try to travel upward?